Hi guys, welcome back to Coach's Corner. This week we're going to talk about how to assess your workout intensity even if you don't have a heart rate monitor. So nowadays I know people work out a lot with either Garmin or Polar, whether it's a wrist heart rate, chest strap, but there are still a lot of people like myself that just run with a good old Timex watch, so no heart rate feature. Well, how can we make sure that we're running or biking or swimming at the proper intensities if we don't have that heart rate monitor on us? I'm a firm believer that when we get into a race, we should really be able to go by feel, and sometimes being able to practice this in workouts without that heart rate monitor is a good way to establish what that feel of that race pace is or any of those workout intensities. So we're going to use the talk test, and that's going to help you assess without that heart rate monitor. So if we look at our easy recovery runs, if we're using that talk test, this means that we should be able to hold a normal, comfortable conversation without getting breathy. So you guys know what I mean when I say that. So where you're huffing and puffing between words, or maybe you can't get out a word without having to take a big gasp of air. Frequently, even on some of these recovery days, I can be heard either in my house or in the neighborhood for just singing at the top of my lungs while I'm on my recovery workouts. Now, this is an extreme case because if you're singing, you're requiring a lot of oxygen at one time. So these are my lowest intensity workouts, so those spin out rides or those really, really easy recovery runs. So equate that 55 to 70, maybe up through 75% max heart rate. That's in that comfortable conversation zone. So you should be able to say sentences at a time without having to take deep breaths in between each phrase or each sentence. If we're moving on up in intensity, when we look at those tempo workouts, so remember these are those longer intensity, whether they're run, bike, or swim, where you're sustaining a higher force output and speed over the course of that duration, but you should still have it in control. So typically your heart rate is somewhere between the 80-84% of your max heart rate when we're looking at tempo running, which puts us at a place where we should still be able to say sort of those longer phrases. So 3, 4, 5 words at a time, maybe even short sentences before we're getting breathy, needing to take that breath in between those phrases. Okay, so not that we're going to be constantly talking throughout our tempo workouts, but it's important that we're not working at an intensity that's too hard, so we can use those short phrases to test where we're at when we're out on those workouts. Now, when we move up to our threshold workouts and even up into our intervals, so when we're working at between that 85 and 88% in our threshold workouts, then this we should be able to say those short phrases, so maybe 2, 3, 4 words at a time, and that's about it. When we get into the interval workouts, now we're only able to say a couple words at a time, maybe even just one word, a yes/no answer. If somebody shouts out, "How are you feeling?" you may be able to give kind of that thumbs up, thumbs down, short, quick burst of a word, and that's about it before having to get back to the grind. If we're racing, it's important that we also understand this talk test, because depending on the duration of the race, we may need to modify the intensity that we're starting at or trying to sustain throughout the race. So typically if we're looking at something that's over 2 hours or over 3 hours, then we're starting at a lower percentage of our max heart rate early in the race to be able to sustain and preserve those glycogen stores as we get later into the race. So if we're looking at a lot of those longer races starting between 75 and 80% of our max heart rate and not going over, then it's important in a race, even if you don't have that heart rate monitor, to be able to assess where you're at. So if you're running with a friend, being able to practice saying those couple phrases or quick sentences to make sure that you're staying in the proper zone. If your coach is out there on the course, if they're able to ask you a question and you're able to respond really quick as you're running past, that's also a good way to assess as well. Maybe even in transition, being able to voice to your coach how you're doing in those short phrases. That's a good way in those longer races to make sure that you're staying at a intensity that's going to allow you to sustain throughout the race. So there you guys have it. That is our talk test. So if you don't have a heart rate monitor, this is a phenomenal way to get that general feel of where you're at from an intensity standpoint. So remember, recovery runs, you should be able to have normal conversation, long sentences, tempo runs, short sentences, longer phrases. Threshold workouts are going to be those short phrases, and intervals and sprints are maybe a word or two at a time, and that's about it. Stick to the talk test when you're out there, and you'll make sure that you're training smarter out there, even when you don't have the technology on you. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next week at Coach's Corner.